Hey, Peter.
Hey.
How's your sound?
Oh, my sound's okay. My vocabulary's better, to be honest.
Your vocabulary's better than your sound?
Yeah, we're going to enter this episode backwards, so please stick around so that this starts to make sense. John Lennon is a walrus.
I am Adam Manis.
I'm Peter Martin.
I am Madam Manis. I am I'm trying to do my name backwards.
I'm Redup Nitram.
What is it?
Redup Nitram.
You've practiced that before.
Well, I know it.
What is it?
Redup Nitram.
Redup Nitram.
Redup. Peter. That's Redup Nitram. Martin. Hi, I'm Redup Nitram. You never learned that as a child?
No, I never have. Hold on.
I started out backwards.
Okay,
Caleb, do you know this is producer Caleb with producer Caleb Can. Look at it. I told him, I said, be ready. What's your name backwards?
Belak Yebrick.
Okay. Everybody knows their name backwards. Look, Adam's having to go pen to paper on this.
So I'm Madisonam.
That sounds too close to your actual name.
Madison M. It's so close, actually. Madison M.
Is your name, what is that called when the word is the same?
Palindrome?
Oh, now that's something you know.
Hannah is a palindrome. I remember that book.
Hannah is a palindrome. Say that 7 times.
Hannah is a palindrome. Hannah is a palindrome.
No, don't actually say it. How you doing, man?
Pretty good, man. How are you?
I'm good. We just did this episode.
Did we? I don't remember.
Okay, for those of our dear listeners that have been around for a minute, know that occasionally, and when I say occasionally, I mean about 70, often, honestly. About 70% of the time. We have to do a redo because, and it's always fun. I wish you guys could see. We should do like an outtakes thing sometime. Although the show sometimes feels like one big outtake.
The whole show has been 1,000 episodes of outtake. Now I have to because we're redoing this too.
Oh, we got to do all the successful parts.
Be like, hey, look at my new T-shirt.
Oh yeah, let me see.
Look at this. Check this out, everybody.
Oh, Hans.
That's a Hans Groiner branded T-shirt.
Is that available via Larry Golding's for some reason?
For some reason, I don't know why, but Larry sells
Instagram.
these. I guess he's a huge Hans
Groiner
fan.
is the man.
Hans Groiner is. I lit up. This came yesterday, and I just I got to wear this for the podcast.
Right? Did it come directly from Austria?
It did. They're selling it out of
Austria.
Was there
you with the customs thing? You had to pay the tax down at the main post office downtown.
Yeah, and you have to apply for one. They demand a picture to make sure it goes on.
No. Big shout out to Larry Golding's. So what are we talking about today? First of all, we're brought to you by Open Studio. Go to openstudiojazz.com. We got some exciting things happening. We got some can we announce the 30-day? You know what? I'm not even going to announce it. I'm just going to drip it out there.
Be on the lookout.
Be on the lookout for 30 days.
Live things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, today we're talking about, and I think I've actually brought up this video. Can we just watch the video?
Yeah, let's watch this video. So this is a video that I found scrolling through the gram of the great Branford Marsalis being interviewed.
That's not Branford Marsalis.
That is not Branford. No.
No.
But he's being interviewed by this guy, who I believe is works for, I think it was St. James Baptist Church or something in Louisville, Kentucky. Anyway, shout out to the church that produced this, because this is a brilliant 30 seconds from Branford about the difference between sound and vocabulary and the use of sound. So
let me see if I can brilliantly pull this up. I hope so. Here we go. Boom.
What would be the difference between sound and vocabulary?
Let's say you have an English professor who knows every word in the English dictionary, and then you put him on a stage to do Shakespeare. Or if you took him and just put him in the pulpit and everybody staring at him, waiting for him to give a stirring sermon, how's he gonna fare? Not very good, because it ain't enough to know the words. You have to know how to deliver the words with a sound that's relative to the period. You have preachers who don't have a great vocabulary, and they got people losing their minds because of the delivery. Sound creates the delivery. The thing that moves people, the thing that makes music, instrumental music, great to me is that the sound of an instrument can have an emotional effect on the listener. Data is just data. It's really a musician's problem. It's not a people problem. People are not going to go take harmony classes to appreciate you. Sad songs need to sound sad. Happy songs need to sound happy. It's like a real simple premise, but that's the hardest thing to do. It took a decade to learn how to do that, to just learn how to create emotion through sound.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Okay, now I think I get it. So, full disclosure, we record the whole episode, almost the whole episode, watched this, and then we started getting into a violent disagreement right? Well, it didn't get too violent, but it was heading there.
Yeah.
Because I think I have there's a lot of layers to even though this is like 30 seconds.
I know, that's what I'm saying, man. It's very deep what he's saying here.
So I think that like the part that's about the style of the sound. So like he starts out saying, somebody who has a big vocabulary in the English language that can get up and do Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Apparently successfully. They're not going to be necessarily successful at getting up to the pulpit where he doesn't say the word improvise, but I think that's what he's implying, right? Where you have to have some improvisational flair, not just the data, as he says. Yeah. And I love that data is just data.
Data is just data. So to me, it's more the difference of like, if you talk about a joke writer versus a stand-up comedian. So it's not even improvisation, but more performing. So if you actually want to connect material to people, there's a tip of the spear that actually is connecting to people, or the conduit that actually reaches out to them. So there are comedians that are great joke writers. There are musicians who are great composers, but not necessarily impactful performers or impactful stand-up comedians, because their delivery is not, they don't have the thing of delivery. Yeah. And I think what Branford is really saying here is, for musicians, that skill is the skill of sound, sound production. And your sound is that delivery.
And it's interesting. Yeah. So, and he says, I think specifically instrumental music.
Right.
So maybe that means that there is, when you're a vocalist and you have words, you're an instrumentalist and a vocalist at the same time, potentially, especially in the jazz world, right?
Yeah.
So that is kind of another thing. This is very specific to like, what is your sound when you're not relying on words as a saxophone player?
Yeah. Well, text can kind of do a lot of the work for you, right? So if you're a vocalist and you're singing lyrics, that can do some heavy lifting on the emotion.
Right.
But I think what he was saying there is, what's so cool about instrumental music is, even though there is no lyrics, you can still make something sound sad with an instrument, with a saxophone. You can still make something sound joyous with a saxophone. You can make it sound frustrating with a saxophone. You can transmit emotion. To other people.
That becomes the story that connects with those unique human emotions. And I love how he breaks it down. And it can seem simplistic to some people, and maybe a little bit jarring, but I think it's just spot on, where he's just saying, something, learn how to play something sad, learn how to play something happy, took him 10 years, this kind of thing is like, that can seem simplistic. And it's like, well, no, great music has a myriad of emotions and everything. It's like, well, really, can you represent as an instrumentalist, improvising or otherwise, these basic human emotions? Of course, there's a myriad of different ones and ways to play them. And, I know I got in a little trouble using the word musical creation. You bristled earlier today.
Musical creation?
Not musical creation, musical curation.
Curation. Well, that's when you're picking notes for...
Well, no. Well, you're picking notes, but how to play, like, what makes the same notes that Branford plays them different than somebody else playing the same notes? I think that's what he's talking about. The sound.
Exactly.
But what does that actually mean when people talk about, you've got to develop your own sound? I remember hearing this from great musicians when I was coming up, and I was like, yeah. I just want to play like Wynton Kelly. I want to play like Herbie Hancock. The sound will come later. Because I didn't know what that meant.
Right.
And plus, especially for the piano, I'm like, look, it's just a button. I'm pressing it.
Right.
I can come up with some hip voicings maybe. Does that give me a sound?
Yeah, well, that's a color palette for sure. But again, that's still just data. Those are just notes that you're playing, right? So the sound is how you play it. So if you took the same data, right?
Yeah.
So the same...
Data in, data out.
Exactly. So the same 6-note melody or whatever. Could you play that same 6-note melody?
Yeah.
And the same tempo even, with different emotions based on how you play it, how you deliver it.
Yeah.
I think that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
That's developing a sound.
Yeah.
Is how you deliver the data. The data doesn't matter. Data is just data. It's always changing because we're always taking in new data, but how you play is a skill that it's not often talked about as far as like growth of like, it is talked about in the fact that especially with classical musicians, they don't have anything to do with data.
Right.
Like a classical pianist has nothing to do with the data that they're playing.
You know what's interesting about this? I just realized this, like, because I've been following Branford Marsalis for a long time. And I mean, I actually met him when I was 15 years old, and he was very, very like generous and kind. He actually he came back to St. Louis the next year with Sting, and like gave me and my friends free tickets to see him up at the Muni here,
nice.
and like invited us backstage. We were just these like little punk kids there, excited to meet Kenny Kirkland and stuff. But I'm just to say that beyond just, and I've played with him before. I've had him come and play some of my music and just, but I've been a big fan of Branford for a long time. Like, I love his playing. Like, he's one of my favorite saxophonists of any generation.
He's the greatest, man.
He's greatest. But it's like, I've heard him talk about like how hard it is to develop a sound for a long time. And I was always kind of like, it was always a little incongruent to me because I've always been able to identify his sound, and I've always felt like he had a very strong sense of sound,
super distinct,
from a very young age.
Agreed, actually.
And so I always thought he was kind of being a little bit disingenuous or something. But I think what it is he has always had such a heightened awareness and understanding, such a nuanced understanding of what it takes to develop a sound, that his like level and barometer was so much higher, the threshold for him, that he was like, oh, I don't really have a great sound, even though everybody else, and saxophonists geek out over him with just playing one note. Damn, that's Branford.
That's Branford.
And like,
I mean, pianists can tell. We could tell.
Yes.
But I think level one of anything is awareness. It sounds like he's been aware of this for decades.
Yeah.
And so even just having awareness is a step above
so
a lot of people.
So you're saying something that you care about actually will start to be manifested if you care about it?
You don't even have to care about it. You can just be aware of it, or
yeah.
put your attention to it.
And
then that alone changes the game. But then if you're as smart and as dedicated as Branford is, and you spend years with your, really high musical intellect, putting energy towards this, obviously you become Branford.
Coming to think of it now, and this is what's great to have this perspective of a little bit longer, been able to hear him since, 1984, basically, on recordings and live, and even occasionally on the bandstand with him. Like, he's been playing the long game for a long time 100%. On sound, which is like, that's maybe easier when you're 40 or 50 or 60 years old. But when you're like in your mid 20s,
so hard.
And you're like, it's going to take a long time to develop a sound. And even people around you are like, oh no, you've got a great sound. Like, it's very easy to be like, oh yeah, thank you very much.
You've got it. Yeah. That it's so hard to see as a young musician for some reason, because you feel like it's just all about the data.
Yeah.
And then it's not till you get older that you realize, like, wait, I've got all this data. Yeah. What's going on?
And that's
like, why don't I sound like I want to sound, even though I have all this data? It's because you haven't worked on your sound.
Right.
You haven't worked on the delivery of the data.
Right.
That includes things like actually thinking about delivery.
Yes.
Like putting your attention to how you're playing things. It includes actually some nuts and bolts things, Peter, too, like, technique things.
Well, I was just going to say I mean, all that stuff is almost like a prerequisite. Like, a lot of this won't really, that can force you into getting that stuff together, because once you're prioritizing sound, whatever deficiencies you're able to start to identify in your playing, if you care, you're going to have to go get that stuff back together. Not because, I want to be able to do this like somebody else. It's like, I'm having trouble expressing my sound. What do I need to do to develop in my technique to better get to that?
But it includes something, too, that I bristled at before, but in this context is true, which is taste, which is musical taste, right? Which is artistic taste, but not in the way of like, I'm going to use this camera lens, or I'm going to choose this chord voicing, but more in the way of like, what are the 12 different ways to play this one 4-note voicing? Like, how are the different textures that I can get, from, dynamics to rolling to, whatever. Like, that's where the artist part comes in, is like, I have these 4 notes to work with. How many different ways can I express it? And what does each one of those evoke in me and my audience? Like, what does it mean in the context of what happened before and after it? What does it mean in the context of what's happening around me culturally right now in the zeitgeist that we're in? All of that stuff is important, I think, as artists, as you get to a higher level, to put our attention to.
Absolutely. And I'll just to put a button on this, and as kind of a corollary to our endless drivel about this subject.
Really. I want to dribble.
I would direct everybody to Branford Marsalis and Ellis Marsalis duo.
Oh, that's a great record.
And the specific track Stella by Starlight, because I think would be a very interesting, younger-ish, certainly much young. I couldn't tell you exactly how old Branford is at that time, but
so 90.
I'm thinking
6 maybe.
Yeah, maybe something like that. So certainly not 40 years old, maybe 30. It doesn't even really matter. It's just to say that, like, to kind of, I think, prove the point of like Branford's deep and nuanced understanding of what it takes to develop a sound, but also kind of what I'm putting forth in that he's a master of sound. beyond just like an incredible, sound of the saxophone, obviously. But check that track out. It's a brilliant record, but it's one of my favorite tracks of them. I mean, the sound that they get together, and I think that it, as often does with this, it can kind of better sort of manifest what it is we're trying to add to the dialogue here.
And then as pianists, there are little things that you can do to actually work on this like right away. Just take a melody. Just take Stella by Starlight. And like practice varying your things like articulation, dynamics, and even like rhythmic things like that. It's the same melody. What if I mess with all kinds of sounds? Some aren't going to work. And why am I doing it? What am I'm thinking about the lyrics, obviously. All of these little things, dynamics, touch, articulation, how much you slur your eighth notes. I mean, just doing a constant eighth note line and practicing how connected are they? How disconnected are they? How your accents, how heavy are your accents? Like these are little boring technical things, but you put it all together and ask, well, what does that feel like? Does that feel like joy or anger or disappointment? Like, how does that sound?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Cool. Well, till next time.
You'll hear it.
I'm in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, currently.
I'm in Indianapolis.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Andrew, hi.
Because I feel inspired to play something else from your playing.
Okay, that's great. I think using the metronome is a great tool, but it's not the only tool.
All of the answers are really in the music.
What does it mean to live in a groove, be in a groove?
Until next time, happy practicing.